everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC. Je suis ravie de vous retrouver pour ce format 100% hybride. At the top of this program, le Royaume-Uni défend corps et âme le vaccin de l'université d'Oxford. Malgré des données scientifiques floues, le vaccin fonctionne selon le gouvernement britannique. On écoutera un des chercheurs du vaccin AstraZeneca sur CNBC. Nouveau pic de cas aux États-Unis à l'approche de l'hiver. Certains États mettent en place de nouvelles règles. On se rendra à New York pour plus de détails. Le secteur de la culture toujours en crise alors que les activités ont repris de manière partielle en Europe. Les lumières de Broadway sont éteintes depuis désormais 8 mois. Welcome to Smart World with CNBC. C'est parti, let's go. Au Royaume-Uni, le gouvernement apporte son soutien au vaccin d'AstraZeneca et de l'université d'Oxford. Alors que des doutes ont été soulevés aux États-Unis, les conseillers de Boris Johnson disent que l'accent devrait être mis sur le fait que le vaccin fonctionne. Oxford professor Sir John Bell discusses the timeline of AstraZeneca vaccine.
I mean, there's always a problem in announcing scientific results by press release, and that is that you don't have all the data out there and people aren't able to really look and think about the data properly. So I think our position now is that we're in the process of getting a peer-reviewed publication out that'll be able to lay out all the data so people can examine it and think about it carefully. And I'm sure the producers of the other vaccines are probably doing the same. And then we'll be in a much better position to know what we're doing. But ultimately, actually, to determine whether this is a safe and effective vaccine, it's going to be up to the regulators to do that. And again, we welcome the fact that they'll be able to cast an independent eye on what's going on.
And of course, all of these trials rest on people volunteering to be a candidate in the vaccine trial. And Andrew, you were one of those people. Why did you put yourself forward in the first place?
Well, as you probably know, I've been fighting to get theatres reopened and indeed all forms of indoor music spaces up and down not only just Britain, but all over America and the world, based really on the information that I got very much earlier in the year, in fact, January, to be precise, from South Korea, where live performances have continued all that time. And because I really tried to absolutely bang the drum for live entertainment, it seemed to me that the very least I could do, as I don't live that very far from Oxford, was to volunteer as an oldie to see if I would be accepted onto the trial.
And Andrew, as your industry, as you know it so well, for live theatre and live musical performances, how have governments, particularly the UK and the US, responded? Have they been helpful, or does the future of your industry rest on science and developments like this vaccine?
Well, obviously, it clearly does depend a great deal on the development of the vaccine, but there have been a number of measures, a load of measures that have been applied in, say, Korea and in Japan, for example, which have mitigated the effect of the virus enormously. And it has been frustrating because one hits the health authorities all the time. Every time you come up with something new, or something, old that has been successfully trialed in other places, there's always some reason why you can't proceed with it. And I know it's actually frustrating government, actually, in Britain, too. However, we are where we are, and I can only report that I don't know whether I've actually had the real vaccine because, of course, by the nature of the experiment, I wouldn't know. But if I have, I haven't had any effects from it whatsoever other than feeling great.
Professor Sir John, whether the results suggest 90% efficacy or the 60% efficacy that we'll dive into in a moment, when is it realistic, do you think, that we'll be back to normal, going to live theatre and have herd immunity in countries like the UK and US?
Well, I think the rollout of the vaccines is likely to happen pretty quickly after, at the end of December, the beginning of January. And my expectation is the UK, which of course is a much smaller pool than the US, but we should be pretty substantially vaccinated, I would have thought, by spring, maybe late spring, but certainly by spring. So I'm hoping we're going to get back to normal and be able to enjoy the theater as we always did before. And I'm completely with Andrew that we need to work hard to try and get those things back in play.
Selon Sir John Bell, professeur à l'université d'Oxford, prendre des extraits de données n'est pas un moyen utile de faire une analyse de ce qui se passe réellement. Les scientifiques de l'université d'Oxford comptent donc publier plus de données dans des revues scientifiques afin de permettre au public d'analyser davantage leurs essais cliniques. De loin, le pays le plus affecté par la pandémie, les États-Unis atteignent de nouveaux sommets en termes d'infections et de décès. New York is preparing for the COVID winter. À l'approche de l'hiver, le gouverneur de New York met en place un nouveau plan pour contrôler l'épidémie de Covid, en plus de celle de la grippe.
His office says that he is discussing what he calls that winter plan, but he hasn't gone into exact details about what it would include, just a broad outline, and among that, a mechanism for vaccine distribution, more restrictions in so-called microclusters, and taking a really close look at hospital bed space. Now, Shep, the governor is also talking about increasing testing in schools, although it's unclear exactly how that would work or whether the school systems will have the resources to do it. As you know, Mayor Bill de Blasio here in New York City has faced a lot of backlash for closing schools, even though the positivity rate in schools is much lower than the rest of the community. Now, Governor Cuomo says that increased testing in classrooms will be crucial to reopening come this winter, and we expect to get more details on all of that in the coming days. Meanwhile, the line for rapid testing here in New York City continues into the night, Shep.
Le nouveau plan sanitaire à New York diviserait l'État en zones rouges, orange et jaune. L'idée est d'imposer des restrictions basées non seulement sur les taux d'infection, mais aussi sur le nombre d'hospitalisations par quartier. Et d'ailleurs, à Paris comme à New York, les théâtres sont toujours fermés. La ville américaine, berceau de la culture et du tourisme, cela fait maintenant 8 mois que les néons de Broadway sont éteints. Broadway composer Andrew Lloyd Webber feels, however, very optimistic on the comeback of Broadway theaters.
Well, I have my Cinderella that should have opened 6 weeks ago, opening now in May. And I feel very, very optimistic that we will achieve those dates. I mean, I've been very, very closely involved with all of the authorities here, and also with talking every week, except for this week because of Thanksgiving, but to the Broadway League and monitoring what is going on, obviously, on your side of the Atlantic. And I am very, very positive that certainly as far as Britain is concerned, that I think that, after rather a bumpy, probably, going into January and perhaps the beginning of February, I think things will start to get a lot better. I mean, I must say, just coming back to that point the professor was making about press releases, I obviously being very interested in this for the reason of wanting to get audiences back into the theatre. I did have a look very, very, very carefully at what was the announcement of the other 2 vaccines and the press releases there. And it was very clear that that's exactly what they were. It was press releases that I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that either of them have yet got to the point where the regulators have actually authorised them.
No, definitely they're at different stages, Andrew, and as you said, we need to wait for all of the full data. In the meantime, I'm also fascinated by what producers like yourself, Andrew, have done during COVID times, and I know you've embraced social media emphatically. I'm sure you saw that Disney paid a lot to have a recording of a stage show in Hamilton, as opposed to needing to adapt it into a movie or a TV show specifically for TV screens as opposed to stage. Has that made you rethink what you want to do with all of your many assets and release, whether it's to Disney Plus or Netflix, recordings of the stage shows in future as opposed to adapting them fully to movies?
Well, we made available all of the movies and all of the recordings for television that were of all of my shows that we could, free during lockdown anyway, because that's something that I was the very least we could do. But I would stress one thing: I'm a theatre animal. I'm not really a cinema animal, and I don't believe you can really ever at the moment have a substitute for the live experience of that extraordinary thing when you go to the theatre and you know that performance is just for you and the other members of the audience. I just don't think you can replicate that. So whilst I do think that there is there is a great value in filming theatre, and it's getting much, much better. My concentration has really been to get theatre back open again. I did record the whole of the album of Cinderella at home in lockdown, and with a few, now we've been able to open up a little bit in London in the last few weeks. I did actually add my cast in London and a small orchestra as well, but it reminds me a little bit of Jesus Christ Superstar 50 years ago, which I couldn't get on stage because nobody wanted to put it on stage. And so it was recorded first. And now I've had to record Cinderella first because I can't get it on stage. It's a sort of irony. But the album will come out next year. And so that, I haven't been idle in lockdown. In fact, it's been the very reverse.
Like so many of us. True fact, Wilfred and I's best ever double date was at a Phantom of the Opera production on Broadway. In New York, people miss Broadway. It's huge business. A lot of jobs depend on it. It's not going to come back, we think, until summer 2021. Andrew, what is that going to look like when it does come back? Do you think there are going to be any permanent changes?
Well, I think certainly Phantom will come back. I just hope the audiences will. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can be done. I mean, there have been trials done now, which I know the FDA have been looking at very closely, of particularly one chemical that in a very small quantity, and it's a chemical that's been around for a very long time, actually since the 1940s, appears to neutralize cold and flu viruses and indeed the COVID one.
Les producteurs de Broadway multiplient tous les jours les appels Zoom, essayant de comprendre quand et comment leur industrie peut rouvrir. Certains producteurs espèrent produire des spectacles dès cet été. D'autres disent qu'une date plus probable est le début de 2022. Et de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, la situation ne s'améliore pas non plus. En plus de voir sa situation sanitaire se dégrader, les discussions autour du Brexit ne voient pas de lumière au bout du tunnel. Michel Barnier ne baisse pas les bras et annonce aux députés britanniques qu'il se tient prêt pour 4 jours supplémentaires de négociations.
I mean, it's not primarily about documentation, really. What Europe is trying to do here is to erect old-fashioned trade barriers for the reasons that you always erect trade barriers, that it doesn't want to be dependent on an overseas supplier. It wants to develop a domestic capability. So they're not sort of banging the shutter down on the 1st of January, because the people who that would hurt most are existing European corporates who are financed out of London. What they want to do going forward, and there are a lot of sort of interim time-limited measures that have been put in place. So what they're trying to do is to say, we're not trying to upset your existing transactions so much. We're trying to force you out of the market over time in order to see whether a domestic capability in Europe can be created in order to fill that gap.
Simon, you note that the downside for the UK is its restless regulator problem. What can you describe for us what you mean by this and what this means for the outlook for financial regulation here in the UK post-Brexit?
Certainly. The UK regulator has been a fountain of new regulatory ideas, most of which up until now have been implemented at the European level. That is now going to stop. So the question becomes, how fast does the UK diverge from Europe? And certainly if you talk to people in the industry, their concern is not that the UK will deregulate, but that the creative energy within the UK regulators, unchained by Europe, is going to create a sort of increasing flurry of new regulatory ideas. And the concern is that could just make the UK a very awkward place to do financial business, which is kind of the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
Simon, one of the drawbacks or the criticisms of the European regulatory system in general has been the new MiFID II regulations that came into effect a couple of years ago, and this has been a deterrent for international banks and international investment funds. Do you see scope for the UK to deviate from those rules when they're out on their own, making their own rules in the future?
Yes, absolutely. But you have to remember that most of what was in MiFID II was put there by the UK regulator. I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of MiFID II has, to put it very politely, not delivered on what it was intended to achieve. But that doesn't always mean that it will be rapidly rolled back. So there's a chance to make the markets much more efficient by taking out some of the more unsuccessful bits of MiFID II. But the question of whether that will actually happen is a difficult one.
Selon Simon Gleeson, avocat britannique, le manque de progrès et la nécessité de préparer les entreprises aux répercussions d'un départ britannique sans accord de l'UE rendraient imprudentes les poursuites des négociations. Les Britanniques attendent que l'UE se plie à leurs règles. Selon eux, tout accord devrait respecter pleinement la souveraineté britannique, y compris sur les eaux de pêche et le régime de subvention des entreprises. Et sur les marchés, premier coup dur en quelques mois pour le Bitcoin. L'OCDE veut un cadre commun et des régulations. Une annonce qui ne plaît pas aux investisseurs, aux crypto-investisseurs plutôt. Bitcoin's rally come to a halt due to potential regulations.
Hi, Will. Bitcoin's rally came to a halt this week as investors fear some more regulation and look to take some gains. After climbing to nearly 20,000 before Thanksgiving, Bitcoin is back below 17,000 today. That was a 12% drop over just 2 days. That sell-off started Wednesday night after the CEO of Coinbase, which is the largest U.S. crypto exchange, tweeted about potential regulation. Brian Armstrong said he's hearing rumors that the U.S. Treasury Department is planning to rush out new regulations and essentially ban people from holding their own cryptocurrency in what's known as a wallet. Armstrong says he's, quote, concerned about the unintended side effects. Some traders also cited a wave of leveraged positions unwinding this week, and some were just looking for some good old-fashioned profit-taking. Bitcoin is up more than 250% since those March lows. Guys, back to you.
Le Bitcoin a plongé jeudi à son plus bas niveau en 10 jours. L'administration Trump sortante serait susceptible d'affermir la régulation sur les crypto-monnaies, notamment sur l'identification des utilisateurs. QuantumScape rejoint la frénésie d'introduction en bourse. La société de batteries à semi-conducteurs soutenue par le groupe Volkswagen accepte de fusionner avec une société d'acquisition à usage spécial. QuantumScape CEO speaks to CNBC on going public via SPAC merger.
It is, and I think the key point there is, I guess there's a couple of key points. One is, this is the beginning of a massive transformation in one of the largest industries on the planet, and it's going to be a multi-decade-long transition. There's a huge opportunity to create, we believe, hundreds of billions of dollars in value over that period of time. But I think the most important point really to make is that, the time to revenue doesn't reflect what traditionally would be thought of as market risk or technology risk. We have technology that works. Our OEM automotive customers have tested it, and we have the support of the largest car company in the world, which is Volkswagen, which is our biggest investor. And really, the time that we now in first revenue is really spent doing two things. One is ramping up production. Factories take time to build and scale up. And two is to do the final automotive qualification process, which also takes some time. So it's a little bit different than a traditional company that might be more of an earlier stage play.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it is one thing for things to work in a laboratory and another things for them to work at scale. You're confident that your battery, a solid state battery that, of course, will be able to be charged more quickly and obviously give a longer life, that it will be able to work at scale? And you'll be able to produce it at scale?
Well, what we're confident of is that the fundamental science risk is behind us because the battery has already been tested at automotive power conditions by the automotive OEMs themselves. And I think relative to scaling up production, we obviously understand our technology well. We know the processes that are involved in making it. But keep in mind that the production partnership is with Volkswagen. We have a joint venture with VW where we're going to jointly make these batteries to scale. And obviously VW knows how to make very high volume, very high quality products in the marketplace. So yes, I think we're pretty comfortable that we're going to be able to scale this now that the technology works.
Jagdeep, there are a lot of players in this space, in particular, making great strides in terms of battery efficiency. Tesla is hiring right now actively for its aggressive push in lithium-ion batteries. There's another company out there called Solid Power, which bills itself as all solid state. Can you speak to the technology? Are you completely solid state? Are you some sort of hybrid that uses a liquid or a gel for its electrolytes, and where does it stack up in terms of efficiency and power compared to an equivalent lithium-ion?
Sure. So the key characteristic that defines a solid-state cell is that the separator, which is the material that keeps the anode and cathode apart, is entirely solid-state. It's the ceramic material that doesn't burn. Once you have that separator that's a solid ceramic, you can eliminate the traditional anode, which is either carbon or silicon. And once you do that, you get all the benefits that you referred to earlier, which is you get energy density that's 80% higher. You get fast charge, which you can't do with any other typical cells, either solid state or liquid based. And you get the safety benefits of the ceramic being non-combustible. So the key point here to make is that all the improvements that are being worked on in the lithium-ion battery space, things like better cathode materials with more nickel content, things like better manufacturing processes for the cells, all those benefits still apply to the solid-state cell that QuantumScape has, with the difference that we don't need that extra anode material, which saves both cost and volume, and therefore we leverage the industry's learning curve with the additional benefit of not needing that extra material, giving you the additional benefits of solid state.
Les offres publiques initiales pilotées par SPAC ont gagné en popularité en 2020. QuantumScape vise à entrer en bourse avec une valorisation de 3,3 milliards de dollars et devrait se négocier à la bourse de New York avec le symbole QE. Le leader mondial des applications CRM SaaS, Salesforce, est en pourparlers avancés pour acquérir la plateforme de messagerie d'entreprise Slack. Mais selon certaines analyses, Zoom Vidéo devrait aussi faire une offre d'acquisition. Écoutez.
I agree with you. I don't think these things happen very often, and I'm not sure it'll happen this time. But I do think that for Zoom, being a full-fledged unified communications platform is important. When you think about it in comparison to the other major brands like Microsoft, like Google, those platforms have a combination of video, voice, and messaging. And today, Zoom doesn't have messaging. They have some chat functionality, but I think that messaging combined with a leading platform in video is a really powerful tool to really redefine unified communications for both commercial and increasingly consumer opportunities. And I think 2021 could be a really important year for Zoom in the consumer segment as they monetize or look to monetize that. And I think Slack could be very additive.
Yeah, well, obviously they've got a currency to do it with, at least. I assume they have some cash as well, given their size at this point. But, I wonder if they don't either build or buy something along the lines of what you're talking about, are they more vulnerable perhaps overall over time?
I think it's incomplete. I think messaging is a increasingly popular and important way to asynchronously communicate, with employees, with customers, with applications. And I do think that, Zoom's positioning as one of the dominant, visual and voice communication platforms requires them to have an offering there. Again, I think that's something that they've been looking to build and integrate with over time. But the truth is, large enterprise companies often want one vendor, one security posture to deal with and interact with, and so it could put them at a disadvantage. Again, I don't think it's likely, but I do think that it makes a lot of sense if they were to look to do it.
Selon Alex Zukin de la société d'investissement RBC Capital Markets, même si cette fusion reste peu probable, elle pourrait être utile pour Zoom. L'application vidéo pourrait bénéficier des fonctionnalités de chat de Slack afin d'améliorer leur service Messenger. Coup dur aussi pour l'application de FinTech Beam. La Federal Trade Commission des États-Unis intente une action en justice contre l'application pour avoir prétendument mal géré les dépôts de clients. Certains se sont plaints de ne pas pouvoir accéder à leur argent pendant des mois. La situation semble s'être débloquée, mais la plainte de la FTC suit toujours son cours.
What's new in Steve Wolf's life since we spoke with him last? There's a new baby boy. His name's Jet.
No problems, and couldn't be happier about that.
And he's got $15,000 he's been trying to get back for months from Beam, the app that promised to pay high interest on your savings, as much as 7%, with 24/7 access to your money.
Since you guys aired the story, it looks like it put some pressure on the company to act.
Our investigation found dozens of customers complaining they couldn't get their money out. And Beam, a tiny startup based in this nondescript building in San Francisco, blaming everything from the vendors it used to process transactions to the COVID-19 pandemic. Last week, the Federal Trade Commission sued, alleging deceptive practices.
We were particularly concerned about consumers who complained that as a result of the pandemic that they're out of jobs. And with Beam holding on to their money, they couldn't afford their mortgages and other bills.
It's not clear why Beam is finally able to pay up now when some customers have been trying to get their money back since this spring. A notice to customers on its website doesn't say. But the FTC isn't taking any chances. It's seeking a court order to prevent a repeat performance.
We want the court to tell Beam that it can't make these kinds of false promises to customers again.
Meanwhile, one depositor has filed a proposed class action suit on behalf of thousands of Beam customers seeking unspecified damages. And those vendors Beam blamed are asking an Ohio judge to rule that they acted appropriately. The company is declining to comment on the lawsuits and has yet to respond in court. Can Beam survive? In its notice to customers, the company urges those who receive paper checks to cash them within 180 days, or they may no longer be good. Steve Wolf says he's learned his lesson about entrusting an unknown app with that kind of money.
It would be nice if there's a physical location or at least some kind of a national brand, recognizable national bank that you've got some recourse, right, if things go haywire.
Now, a Beam spokesperson says the company is under strict obligations not to comment now, but there will be a statement at the appropriate time. Beam is one of a growing number of so-called fintech companies. These are technology companies that handle your money, but they're not banks, so they're not regulated like one. The FTC says it's spending a lot more resources these days policing this new industry. Officials say do your homework before signing up, and if you do run into a problem, do what dozens of Beam customers did and file a complaint.
L'agence fédérale a commencé à enquêter sur Beam en mai et a déposé une plainte fédérale le 18 novembre. Elle accuse la société de FinTech et son PDG de 37 ans, Yinan Du, d'actes injustes, je cite, et trompeurs. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. See you very soon for the rest of International News.